Welcome back to Impact Factor. I'm your host, Katie Van Aken, and this is our very first interview episode. So enjoy! Welcome back to Impact Factor. My guest today is someone who went to grad school with me. We got our PhDs in the same place, same department, same city. And so I will be asking her about her path and what she's doing now. And so today we're going to interview Mallory Clites, PhD.
Thank you.
Woo-hoo, claps. So let's get this out of the way. What was your PhD program, and where did you attend?
I got my PhD in material science and engineering, and I attended Drexel University with you here in Philly.
Me. Yes, we did do that. Material science. Okay, so for the listeners out there who don't really know what that means, can you give us some buzzwords or hints?
Sure. So, like material science is just the study of solid materials, right? So I did my undergrad, which is the next question, sorry. I did my undergrad in chemical engineering, and that was more the study of like liquids, chemicals, flows, and those kind of things. And material science is more the fundamental study of like solids. So I feel like material science is pretty weirdly applicable to a lot of different things. So I did like ceramics when I was a kid, and weirdly now understand more about ceramics than when I was doing it as an art form as a kid. But.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things for material science that I found interesting was in the single department that we were in, there were research groups doing biomaterials, energy materials, like ceramic materials, and their applications were so different, but we were all technically studying the same science.
You know, like metals, you can have an entire like PhD focused on like the fundamentals of metals and stuff like that, but it's vastly different than like what I did, which was like more electrochemical materials and like electrochemistry and energy materials. But yeah, then there's people who are like, like I study composites or 3D printing, because you can like 3D print different materials,
or
3D
inks,
print metals, inks, polymers, fabrics.
Very cool. Yeah, that was one of the draws for me. I think was the fact that the program was so diverse in like the areas it touched. Okay, so your undergraduate was in chemical engineering. What made you make the transition, or what was the sort of link from chemical to materials?
Yeah, so I didn't have like a clear pathway for what I wanted to do at all in undergrad, and I changed schools halfway through my undergrad. Like I transferred from a smaller school to a larger school, still doing the same major, chemical engineering. And so by the time I got to like end of my junior year, I didn't have like internships or like job offers lined up the way some other kids did, because I kind of started over when I transferred. And so I just started applying to labs at the school to work at as an undergrad researcher. And I got, the first offer I got was from a professor who did fuel cells and battery research. And I didn't know really anything about them at the time, but it was like early enough where I could sign up for classes for my senior year. So I signed up for like 2 electrochemistry focused classes so that I could learn. And, he gave me like an offer to work for free in his lab. And I jumped on it, and I was working on fuel cells then. But that experience is really like the first experience I had in like a lab setting. And it's the first experience I had with anything like really electrochemistry outside of, high school electrochemistry courses. But I always liked electrochemistry even then, and even in high school. And fuel cells made a lot of sense to me. And so I wanted to go into that area. And that's kind of when I figured out that the stuff I liked about chemical engineering is kind of where it overlaps with material science.
Cool.
And that's kind of when I figured out that that's more the major I probably should have gone for in undergrad, but didn't know at the time.
Hey, better late than never.
Yeah, so that's when I applied for grad school and looked into programs that had like electrochemistry focus or research groups that were focusing on electrochemistry.
And you went right to your PhD from undergrad, right?
Yeah, I even like had to finish my undergrad with an extra summer course because of my transfer. So I like finished July of like 2014. It was starting in like August. No, we started in like September, October, right, at Drexel. So I had like 2 months.
Quick
between,
turnaround.
Yeah, 2 months between undergrad and grad, and didn't do anything else in between, but like move.
Yeah, and because you were changing cities. One of the things that I tried to touch on in my like, oh, you're starting school now, what, podcast is about how many people do go right from undergrad, but other people don't. And so when I first started, I was in a collection of new grad students, and half of us, had just come from undergrad, and half of us had come from like real jobs. What was your experience like?
I think it might depend also like the group that you start with, like the cohort you start with, and also like the school you go to, right? Because I think some schools have like predominantly most students coming straight from grad school, and I think there's like a mix. At our school, I feel like the majority came straight, but there was like at least a good amount that did like work for several years and then go back to school. And that probably has to do with like also like where your university is like geographically, if it's near industries and stuff like that, where they would be going back to school or part-time or full-time and stuff. But yeah, it was a pretty big mix, but I would say like probably like 70-30 for like straight to grad school, and then like 30% taking a few years or more. Yeah.
And did you know, I guess this can be like a tough question, but what made you decide to do this, to get your PhD?
Yeah, well, so when I started working in the lab, I liked the lab setting in an undergrad, and I had kind of always wanted to be a professor, I thought. My parents were teachers, high school teachers, and they encouraged me not to become a high school teacher or become a teacher, because it was a lot of grueling work and a lot of hours with not a lot of, reward.
some babysitting.
Yeah, it was a lot of time and energy from them that doesn't always come back in the form of a paycheck or in the form of, I don't know, appreciation.
Sure.
So, but I thought like professor was kind of that step where maybe you get to experience all that teaching and all that fulfillment from like shaping young minds, but maybe it's a little bit better paid was my thought process. So that's what I wanted to do. Not a professor now, so that didn't become my final destination, I guess. But that's what kind of drew me to getting my PhD, was kind of doing lab work that I like doing, with the ultimate goal of becoming a professor down the road.
Yeah, and that's also one of the things I've listed as like a very concrete reason to get your PhD, right? Because to be a professor, especially in the sciences, you really need a PhD. So it's not a like, should I or shouldn't I? If that's the direction that you want to go, it's sort of the logical next step.
Definitely, at least for sciences, you can be a lecturer if you have like a master's or something, depending on the school. And like my father did has been like a lecturer in the past, like here and there for schools, but he has a master's, but he's not in the sciences. He's in like English journalism. So it's
and the arts too. I think it's just like it's a whole different ballpark.
But you're right, for mathematics and sciences and the STEM field, it tends to be a requirement if you're going to become a professor.
So you did fuel cells in undergrad research, and then you came to Drexel. And what was like the meat and potatoes of your research there for your thesis?
So I studied intercalation cathodes for lithium ion, and then potentially other like ion-based battery systems. Like the idea of, if it's not a lithium ion battery, could it run on sodium, potassium, magnesium, calcium? But so I was working specifically on like mostly vanidates, vanadium-based oxides for intercalation cathodes for batteries.
Okay, now let's imagine that I'm 12 and you're explaining intercalation to me. What does that mean?
Right, so like when you say a lithium-ion battery, what that means is that the ion form of lithium, right, a positively charged ion, is inserting into a material to store energy, and then it's being released from that material to deliver energy, right? And it's going back and forth from like two sides of the battery, between an anode and a cathode.
Which are made of two different materials in batteries.
Right, yeah. And so like upon one, when you like use the battery and you're pulling electricity out of it, it moves one direction when you're you plug that battery back in if it's rechargeable and you charge it back up, the ions move the other direction. And so intercalation is just the insertion of that ion into like a crystal structure. And so that's when I say I'm studying intercalation-based batteries, that's what I mean.
The method at which the energy is stored.
Right. And I was specifically looking at vanadium oxides that were like layered structures where the lithium or whatever ion, but lithium mostly, would insert in between the layers.
Gotcha. Very cool. So what was your research group like? What did you have, was everybody in your group working on something similar? What were sort of the parameters of your research group?
Yeah, so I was only the second PhD student in my research group, but eventually, I was there for 5 years, so eventually it grew to like slightly larger than that, and everybody, PhD students or grad students or like undergrads that worked in there, were working on some form of at least like electrochemical storage, energy storage of some form. So me and the other PhD student who was the first person to work in our group both worked primarily on batteries, but he eventually started working on some capacitive deionization which is like a filtration system to remove ions from liquids. And there were some other things too that got studied that were all energy storage in some form or electrochemical reactions in some form, like pseudocapacitors, capacitors, things like that. But the vast majority of research in our lab was battery based.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it makes sense from a professor's perspective, especially a new professor, to branch out into related fields that require like similar research equipment and materials and stuff. Things like battery testers and other types of electronics, I imagine, could be used for the other types of energy storage devices research in some cases.
Yeah, and like all of these things are like electrochemical reactions, so like the fundamental science behind all the things that we kind of just talked about are all the same, right? Mm-hmm. Like it's all an electrochemical reaction, like a positive, negative, charge balancing, but the difference is like what it's used for. Mm-hmm. Is it storing charge? Is it filtering out charged elements from something? Is it like a pseudocapacitor is like a faster delivery of charge compared to a battery, things like that. But they're all very, very similar, and because they're all electrochemistry, the way you study it, the same tools, you use the same testing equipment, you make them very like similarly.
The materials themselves.
So like a lot of the ovens that we used and a lot of like the electrode like blading things that we use are used for the same, for different systems, but the same stuff you can use over and over again. So for a small lab, you can buy like a handful of tools and develop several different systems and test them all.
Cool. So let's move on to now. So you graduated when? How many years ago?
Oh gosh, you're quizzing me on this. 2019.
And so 3 years ago.
Yeah.
So you've been a doctor for 3 years.
Yeah.
What kind of role are you in now? Did you do anything else in between?
Yeah, so I am a federal employee now. I work for the government. Right out of grad school, I got a fellowship to work for Department of Energy, and kind of like shadowed and had mentors within the Department of Energy themselves, specifically in the Vehicle Technologies Office. So I did a lot of shadowing on like developing batteries for electric vehicles and like understanding the testing protocol and the needs for an electric vehicle battery. So it's a lot more applied than what I did in my PhD, which was very more like fundamental electrochemical studies. And this was much more like, okay, these are full-size batteries that are going to go into a car. What performance do they need to meet, and things like that. And now I work for the Department of Energy, and I oversee like some of the research that we do, like the RD&D for improving performance of electric vehicle batteries.
Cool. So you're not actually doing research in a lab?
No.
Okay. But you are connected with that research going on, or more like nationally?
Well, yeah. So like there's a lot of research that comes out of like the national labs system, which is all like Department of Energy led national labs, and then there's also research done by industry and academia as well. And Department of Energy kind of oversees a lot of that research that is like funded and supported through Department of Energy, and we have kind of like goals for like developing and improving performance of batteries, and we like support and fund research that is like targeting some of those specific goals.
Cool. And so you are at the DOE. Is the role that you're in typically filled by someone with a PhD? Like, are you working with other PhDs?
It's pretty split. It's not a requirement for the role I'm in to have a PhD, but there are definitely people with PhDs that are there. There's people with master's degrees as well. There's people who like worked their way up, like the GS scale, coming from straight undergrad. That means the government's pay scale. That's like what the standard pay scale is for people who work for the government. There's a few others, but that's one the DOE uses primarily. And so there's people who have worked in different positions within the agency for years and years and years, and eventually they get up there. But then, if you have a master's, or if you have a PhD, so it's kind of a mix of who I work with on a daily basis. But there's a few others of us who have PhDs.
That's good, because I mean, I've been in situations where the number of PhDs is pretty small, and there can be sort of a connotation around the PhD, and how they think about problems, and I don't know, like some people who are very much industry driven, they laugh at a PhD who wants to like sit down and write an equation. That's what they think they're going to do, which may be true, but it's not always true. And especially, I think you spent 5 years studying batteries, so it makes complete sense that you would be a valuable asset because you know so much about that field.
Yeah, and I think it is, it is like a split. We work, like I said, like you work with people who are in the national lab system and doing a lot of research, and they, most of them have PhDs, because they're like laboratory researchers, people in academia, like we said, professors that have PhDs, like, so you're working with a lot of PhDs on a daily basis, but then at like the actual, like, government agency, it is a mix, but there's also a lot of people that come like from industry, right? Who like worked for however many years in industry, in certain like areas that are like directly related to the work that they do here. And so you do get like a very different, you get a mix of very different backgrounds, and that can be pretty helpful. So, when I talk I tend to get very like fundamental electrochemistry and like try to focus on like the primary like science behind it. But then, the realistic real world application, there's people who worked for battery companies for years and years and years, or whatever company it is, in like industry, and so they have a different perspective of like the real world application and
challenges,
the challenges and the manufacturing challenges, and just an aspect that you don't necessarily get from just going straight to PhD. So it is a nice mix, and it's definitely like the PhD is an asset to me in my job, whether it's a required item or not.
Cool. That's cool. I think the diversity of your team, or your office that you're talking about, I think that's where we should strive for in all cases, because you can't solve a problem with all the same people. All right, so let's jump back to grad school. When you were in grad school, what kinds of things were you involved in outside of your research and classes? Did you do any other extracurriculars as part of the department or program?
As part of the department or program? Not really. Well, we had that, we were part of the Electrochemical Society, so we had our own chapter, right? And so we did some like programs and stuff.
That counts. That's good.
For ECS, we did that Family Feud a few years. You remember that?
I do. Yes.
And I hosted that. So we put that together and, came up with a lot of those questions that were like Family Feud focused. And we got like polling from different professors like across, multiple universities and stuff to give us answers for like their choices as it related to these electrochemistry focused questions, their opinions. And then we, made the kids join teams and try to compete against each other with prizes. So I guess that is like an activity I did for the school outside of things.
Well, because it didn't contribute to your dissertation, right?
It didn't, no.
But I like to think that those things are like to help you get through the hard times sometimes.
Yeah, and we did a lot of like the community outreach stuff for kids. The materials day that we would do at Drexel, and they would kids would come and learn about like different types of material science, and that I do think that's really, really cool because, like I said, I ultimately came into my PhD with the goal of doing some form of teaching. The ultimate goal is professorship, but obviously I came because I enjoyed teaching. So I do still kind of enjoy like, talking to like younger students about like what science is and what electrochemistry is or what materials are. And we did like that week-long camp that we would put on for, was it high school students?
Yeah, high school age.
Yeah, to come and we would, do all these materials focused games and sessions and lectures for them to try to get people excited about going into material science. So I guess that was a lot of outreach that we did.
Yeah. What for the like materials day? Did you guys have a specific booth with a
did the fruit
with
battery.
a lesson? Okay.
Yeah, the fruit battery.
Very on topic.
Yeah. The idea that you can use like a lemon or a lime or really any kind of battery or potato, banana, like whatever, you can make it to deliver a charge to like turn on the light bulb. So that was our booth, and I feel like it was so easy to set up compared to other people's booths and stuff. And I know some people were really like creating like photoluminescent stuff and things like that. It was a lot of work, and we definitely got to show up with like
a bag of fruit.
Yeah, copper and a bag of fruit and some wires and light some light bulbs up, and it was easy to clean up and break down.
But that's cool too, because I think kids especially are familiar with batteries because they use them for all their toys. But now you're saying let's talk about what these batteries are and show you that you can make one with a lemon. And I think that's a good easy learning. It's
definitely like a real world way to connect it to something that they know from like their real world. Like this is all stuff. And we talked about it in a way that would be like, this is all stuff you can have in your house, right? Like we're using copper and zinc plates, but like you don't have to. You can use a nail that's galvanized and a penny,
right?
And the lemon or lime, and still do the same thing. And but we inevitably would get the question of like, okay, well, how many of these lemons?
I was gonna say that, yeah.
Do we need to like charge a car?
Yeah.
Like, and I think that one of the other PhD students researched that and figured it out. It's like something like 6 million, 10 million.
Yeah, it's a lot.
An insane amount that you could never drag lemons behind a car to do.
Yeah, but it's good to keep that. It's good for them to keep that in perspective, and I liked those events because I liked the kids' questions. I thought they were fun.
Yeah, and I honestly think that 6 million is still not as much as I would have thought.
Yeah.
For everything that powers a car, I would have thought you would need more. So.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. So, just a couple more questions. So obviously our audience for this is people who are either in the midst of or thinking about getting their PhD. And so, my goal is to kind of give people a heads up or make them aware of things that maybe we learned in our time that they would benefit from knowing now. So this might be a tough question, but what was something that surprised you about getting your PhD?
So my PhD experience was not necessarily the most chill or easy on me stress-wise.
Okay.
So I had bouts of depression before going into my PhD. So it wasn't like the first time experiencing it, but my PhD definitely was a stressor at a level I don't think I could have anticipated. And it definitely did take a toll on me, like mentally for a while. And definitely required some like decompression after, and even during, I kind of had to. I wasn't necessarily good for a while about finding a balance.
Like self-help and like taking care of yourself.
Yeah. Prioritizing kind of like what you need on a day-to-day basis, which I think people, like post-pandemic, I think people kind of get that more, that they need to be doing that. But definitely for myself at the time in grad school, it felt like, the ultimate goal was getting my PhD, and it was kind of like, no matter what, you're getting through it. There's really no other option. You have no jobs lined up unless you get this PhD, and so it very much felt like I had no choice but to just keep muddling through, and I couldn't take the time I needed to take for myself. And I think that was something that surprised me, and I maybe like learned about myself, that I didn't necessarily have that built-in self-care that I probably needed, or that work-life balance. And so like one of the reasons why I ultimately went towards the route that I went to is because I think like the agency I'm at now, and the office that I'm with now within that agency, does kind of respect a work-life balance. And I mean, I think a lot of places do, but I think that was really important for me coming straight out of grad school, that I needed to try to set that balance for myself better moving forward. And I didn't necessarily want to go into like a postdoc that was going to feel a little bit like a continuation of grad school life. And I kind of did a change that gave me a little bit more boundaries. And I think that is one like really good thing about like working for the government, is that they do have, well, you're supposed to only work a certain amount of hours, right? So there's a lot of like respecting of your in time and your out time.
Yeah, and I mean I don't think you're alone in that. I think that the PhD can be stressful, and making sure to balance is so important, but also knowing that it's hard to convince yourself when you're in it. But I think us looking back on it can say that, it's not a life or death situation, but it feels like it.
Yeah, it really does. And I think like that probably was like the greenness of me, right? Like having come straight out of undergrad, I had jobs before, but they were part-time jobs. They were, working as a waitress or as a busser, and I always knew that they were temporary and they were part-time, and then my PhD, getting paid to do research and to get my graduate degree was like the first like real step into my career. And so it felt very life or death at all times. And I think, when we were doing that, you could see certain people who had much better work-life balances. I remember there was like someone in our PhD who was married and had children, and set very strong boundaries of, when I leave the lab, and and I have to prioritize my family. And I think being like young, straight out of undergrad and single, I was in a long distance relationship the whole time, but I lived alone, and I think that really enabled me to not set any boundaries. And I like would go home, and I could just keep working until all hours of the night. And there was no one stopping me from not setting boundaries for myself. So I think that was really something.
Yeah, and you mentioned work hours, and I think that's important too, because some people work better like that, like they want to sort of be working all the time, and some people can benefit from those strict hours. But I certainly found that it was the people who dictated their hours, early on in their program. They were like, I'm going to be here from 8 to 5 or 9 to 5, and then like don't count on me being reachable. Once you start training people about that, then they get it. But if you were sort of always available for the first 2 years, and then you were like, I'm changing my schedule, it's a lot harder, I think, for people to
you set the precedent. And I think I started to notice, like, over years of being in grad school, my like abilities were kind of like deteriorating because I didn't set any boundaries. And so I was working, pulling all-nighters and stuff. And there are certain people that went in and they treated it like a job. These are the hours that I'm going to work. Maybe they're a little more than a 40-hour work week, but that's the maximum. And I was still kind of treating it like people treat undergrad, where it's like, okay, well, I'll cram, and I'll stay up till 5 a.m., not leave the lab, keep working, throughout the night, or go home and stay up all night, analyzing data, and that really takes a toll on you. So yeah, then 2 or 3 years in, then you're trying to set boundaries that were not set for the past 3 years, and
it's harder.
It is harder, and it is harder for people to understand them too. It's like, well, it's never been the case previously.
Exactly.
So.
Yeah. All right. So what? Let's jump a little bit. What is there anything you miss about that time of your life? Anything about the PhD atmosphere or grad school life that you sort of don't have anymore as a working adult?
Yeah, I mean, I think that grad school is almost like a weird form of like arrested development. Not in a negative way. Well, good and bad, but because you're not an undergrad, you're older, you have like more knowledge, you're still working super hard on things, but you're also like surrounded by people who have kind of the similar lifestyle as you, kind of all together, and have less responsibilities outside of your PhD, right?
True.
A bulk of us didn't have, like families and mortgages and a ton of responsibilities.
Even cars,
Yeah, like cars.
We lived in the city, so.
Yeah, I did have my car in the city, but it was mostly just collecting parking tickets. But
classic grad student.
Yeah. So, but you could do things then, like, you've had a really, really stressful week, and so like you can just like then go out and just like have a lot of fun on the weekends, and we were younger and hangovers weren't as terrible, and
that's true.
Everybody kind of was in the same situation, and it was almost like trauma bonding, right? Where everybody's had a stressful work week and nobody's experiments went well, and everybody's having problems developing their thesis, so you can go out and like have a fun night, and it's like, I don't know, low stakes.
Yeah. And you're surrounded by people who are going through the same like shit that you are.
Right. And in a similar life stage as you, whereas like nowadays, my coworkers are all very great, but we're all, in very different, we're in different cities, we're in different ages, we, are in different projects, so we don't really have a lot of the same, like, oh yeah, that was very stressful, and it's a different benefit, right? Because we all then go on and do our separate lives.
Yes.
But, grad school can sometimes feel like a continuation of like undergrad, in the like, you get to kind of be in this like cohort together with people.
Yeah.
That is a lot different than real world jobs.
Yeah, and friendships are made, and
Yeah, I would say that some of my closest friendships are from grad school.
Yeah. Same.
Don't get too flattered.
Do you have any fun memories from that time? Like a story, perhaps? It's okay if you don't.
I'm gonna think about. I didn't prep a story. Let me think about it for a second. Let's see. I don't. Why am I thinking of my attempted carjacking? That's not a fun story.
Well, it's okay. You can tell it anyway.
Yeah, I almost got carjacked in Philly during our grad school because I was DDing us for an evening. And then I dropped you guys off somewhere, and I was like, okay, everybody's good. You're all near your places. I'm gonna head home, and went out alone and had an almost carjacking.
It was like on a main street too. It like wasn't.
It's right by a Trader Joe's.
In a weird place.
Yeah. Yeah, like very easily accessible. I'm sure there were cameras everywhere around there. I think it was convenience. I think it was like spur of the moment, probably, of like, oh, this girl's sitting alone in her car at a stoplight.
And on your perspective, your convenience was you could just drive away.
There was no one else on the road because it was so middle of the night, so I just floored it past the tempting guy, and just like ran red lights home.
Yep.
But yeah, that's not a fun story though. Do I have other fun stories? We did a lot of fun things. We did do things regularly on the weekends together. I think that's the real fun thing, is that we had you had a set group of friends who you could go hang out on the weekends, and because we were all like poor grad students, we weren't like, oh, I'm going away this weekend to some fun exotic place. It was, no, I'll be home. I can go out.
Let's go to the bar and drink the cheapest beer.
Yeah, let's try a new bar we haven't gone to before. Like, we would go to all the rooftops. That's what we started doing.
Yeah.
I really like going to rooftops. But no, there were tons of fun stories. I
memories.
just don't have a specific one thought in my head.
That's okay. You're off the hook. All right. So now that you are not a PhD student anymore, and you're a working adult who has a good life balance, what are some of the hobbies or interesting things that you do outside of your work?
Yeah, I took it to heart when people told me in grad school I didn't have a lot of hobbies. So I attempt to have a lot of hobbies now. So I do like a regular run group in the city I live in, and we like run together 2 to 3 times a week and train for different races and stuff. I bought a house, so most weekends are spent deciding I'm going to repaint this wall or take down that pony wall or buy new furniture. So I do a lot of like going to thrift stores looking for furniture and things like that. And do some hiking. Got a dog, so I take her out a lot of places.
Sounds so grown up.
I know, it's like the boring stuff that you don't think would be exciting to you when you're younger, and now as an adult you're like, oh my god, look at this new washing machine. We got such a good deal on it. Or like
You're not the first person to tell me that when they got a new washing machine, it was like the best day of their life.
It's incredible, especially if you have really crappy washing machines before it, and then you get like a nice one. You're like, what is this?
You're like, I dropped like a pretty dime on this, but it also made my life so much better.
Yeah, but no, for me it's like old like mid-century furniture. Like I'll find it for a credible deal, and I'll text my parents about it, or I'll like text my friends, and they'll be like, cool.
Cool.
What a great table you found. I'm like, yeah, but you don't understand. It's so cheap. It could sell for this much money. And they're like, well, are you gonna sell it? Because if not, then it's worth what you paid for.
Then it's just something in your house.
Exactly.
That's good. I mean, that's what we strive for, right? Is to be post PhD in a world where we can do some of these things that are.
Oh, and I do a lot of stuff in my community, like neighborhood community for like the parks and stuff. Help clean and replant stuff in our local parks. So that's a hobby.
Do any lemon battery demos?
I haven't done a lemon battery demo since...
Park might be a good place for that.
Yeah, I guess that's true. Do the local kids can come watch me make a battery.
Yeah.
They'd probably be like, we know this.
Yeah, we know.
I don't know why you're doing this for us now.
Yeah, they'll be like, we know all about Tesla. Cool. So I wanted to end with some like advice. So looking back on it, if you could give your year one PhD self some advice, what would that be?
Well, okay, I don't want to bypass your question real quick, but I just realized something we talked about before that I probably shouldn't mention here, which is that like when you're thinking about looking at a PhD, some of the things that could potentially matter to you, that kind of I didn't know about until later would be like, the size of your program, right? Mm-hmm. So like I was the second student, as I said before, and so that was a pretty small group, and I think that people would probably thrive well in that situation if they like really wanted a lot of hands-on collaboration, especially with the professor. There was no postdocs in our group when I started. There was really no undergrads either. It was like one undergrad student and one PhD student. And so I think if you want like a really, really close lab where you kind of, you're speaking to your professor regularly, and kind of going back and forth on stuff, that would be the right size. But I think then, if you thrive a little bit better in a larger, group, it's whatever your management style is best for you. That's something to think about. And I guess for me, like my first year PhD student, kind of what you said earlier, what I would try to tell myself that nothing that's happening is life or death. Yeah, I don't know. When you're in the thick of it and you're like 21, 22 years old, it just seems like one wrong move or like, oh, if you decide you can't do this, what can you do, Yeah. But I don't know. I mean, I'm glad I got my PhD and I'm glad I did do it. And I feel like it did teach me a lot of skills after the fact. Maybe that's what I would also tell myself too. Like, I do know how to work under pressure in a way that not necessarily everyone in my job does know. You do learn to think creatively. I think anybody who gets a PhD in anything has to learn how to problem solve and have a bit of a creative mind to try to fix problems, because problems are going to happen. So,
and also because you're being asked to defend a dissertation that you can't just copy someone else's. Like, it has to be fresh and new. And so some of that has to be your ideas,
From your own
or
mind,
they're not going to give you the degree, I think. So
yeah, and just even these other things too that we like take for granted. I think when you get a PhD is like the amount of times that you have to give like a public speech when you're a PhD student. And I definitely know when I started I was not good at public speaking whatsoever. And there's like a lot of people that you'll meet who, you know, have been in careers for a long time and are not good at public speaking whatsoever. And that is something that, like, you know, I when I started my like job now that I'm with now, I remember like one of my bosses asked me like, okay, are you good talking on?
Are you comfortable?
Like, are you comfortable talking in a room? Are you comfortable talking on like a video chat platform to, you know, for meetings and stuff? And to me, I was like, of course I am. I've done so many
very high pressure presentations.
Yeah, high pressure presentation where you're literally being graded afterwards. You know.
Yep.
So that's the thing that like is definitely something you benefit from that I never really thought about, that I was gaining that like capabilities, but you definitely have it nowadays.
Yeah, that's a really good point. All right, so anything else? Otherwise, I want to end on a little trivia game.
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
We can go to it.
So we're gonna test your knowledge about batteries.
Okay.
Because that was your PhD, but these are questions that likely nobody knows about batteries because they're just interesting facts. So, question 1. They're all multiple choice. Question 1. Which of these... Hold, please.
I thought if I leaned away.
Yeah, I forgot. No, I meant, hold on. So, question 1. Which of these cities holds the world's largest rechargeable battery, which powers the whole city during outages? A, Fairbanks, Alaska. B, Vatican City. Or C, Watch Hill, Rhode Island.
I mean, the Fairbanks, Alaska would make sense because I would anticipate a lot more outages in Alaska, right, for a rechargeable battery. I'm trying to read your poker face right now.
No.
What was the other options? I don't think it's Vatican City.
Watch Hill, Rhode Island.
Alaska.
Correct.
Nice.
Good deduction.
Whew.
Talk that one out. Okay. Question 2. Which of these has not been used to make a battery? A, wood. B, frogs. Or C, horse manure.
What do you mean by frogs?
Frogs.
Yeah, but are you talking about like the dead frog study?
Well, yeah.
Okay. See, but depends on what you define a battery as. Because I could see horse manure and wood potentially making energy that could be stored in some format. Horse manure.
Correct.
Nice.
Yes, there was a study where researchers made a battery using wood.
Wood. I thought that. I think I knew that one.
And the frog battery
is
a thing.
Galvani thought the quote-unquote lifeblood.
Yeah.
When he accidentally electrocuted a frog, basically. But that's how you learn that humans can conduct electricity.
There you go. Okay, last question. You've already won the game, by the way, because you have two points. But this one is a great one, too.
What are you going to get me if I win?
Just not embarrassment.
Not get fired.
Not embarrassment on your podcast. Okay, so which of these are long, which of these battery facts is a true fact?
Okay.
A, disposable electronic cigarettes contain perfectly good rechargeable lithium-ion batteries. B, a satellite that had been abandoned in 1967 recently started transmitting again after its batteries decayed, shorting the solar panels straight to the electronics. And C, there is a battery-powered bell at Oxford University that has been continuously ringing for over 175 years.
It's the bell.
Which is true?
Yeah. Am I wrong?
You're right. They're all true.
No. I know the bell.
Yeah.
I know the bell because, I've read that fact before. It's like the oldest, quote unquote, oldest living battery.
Right, and they don't know what it's made of because it's so old, and they don't want to take it apart because they don't want it to stop. So.
Yeah, they assume it's a pile, based
Yeah.
battery.
Yeah.
Voltaic pile based battery, but they can't open it because they're afraid if they open it and take it apart to figure out what's in it, they will break it. Yeah.
What a conundrum. All right. Well,
That's true about the cigarettes, though.
isn't that interesting?
That's so upsetting.
Annoying. I know. It's sad.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks for playing our game, and thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me.
And being interviewed, and we'll have some more interviews coming up. Thanks to Mallory Clites for coming on the show. She wanted me to let you know that if you're interested in any roles at DOE, they are actively hiring, and you can find a link to the positions in the episode notes. Have a good week!